the biggest power that the government, the regime has against us is fear.
United Nations!
They can't hold the people down forever.
To be on the streets and to express is now or never.
What does it take to get a more in-depth look into the week's top local news stories? The Debrief brings you inside for a one-on-one conversation with our reporters every week, right here, right now. The Debrief.
Welcome, everyone, to the Debrief podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Rodriguez, and for David Ushery. Well, they are demonstrations not seen in decades. Thousands of Cubans taking to the streets day after day, pleading with their communist government to save their lives. The island is in a deep economic crisis that has caused critical food shortages with hours-long lines for what little is left. They say there's no medicine, no COVID vaccine distribution, and little power thanks to rolling blackouts in triple-digit heat. Protests, especially ones this big, are rare in Cuba. The government keeps tight control over all aspects of life. Defiance and dissent not tolerated. Historically, internet access is only for the chosen few. It was becoming more widespread, but now it's hard to come by. Authorities are blocking social media sites and restricting access in an apparent effort to stop the flow of information into and out of the country. I was able to talk to Daniel Triana Rubio, an activist who's in Havana under house arrest. Right now, he's working around the internet stoppage, trying to get the word out about what's really happening in Cuba.
Obviously, the whole world is watching what's going on in Cuba right now. So tell me how this started and why this is so different this time after all the other years that we've seen some protests start to try to crop up.
The protest started on Sunday
Mm-hmm.
in a town near to Havana called San Antonio de los Baños. And they say that the protest started because of a light cut out, a blackout. It started like that, but very quickly people started to scream, to shout, and to express the unhappiness, the disagreement against the government, against the regime. And in Havana, I talked to some friends and I'd say, look, we have to. This is the capital of the country. We have to be on the streets and to express. It's now or never. I had been arrested a few times, like 3 or 4 times, because of my activism, and I have participated in a few protests in Havana, and I have been arrested because of always asking freedom of speech as an artist, freedom of association, and asking for the freedom of political prisoners in Cuba.
You felt like this was something that this was the time. See, now I've been to Cuba, right? I was there in 1998 after the Pope had visited, and now they were allowing direct flights from JFK to Havana. So that was a really big deal. And I remember being very taken aback by the lack of freedoms that the Cubans had. Of course, this is something that you hear about and but when you walk the streets and you see people afraid to talk to you because you're media, or you see people afraid to engage with other people or engage with each other, you can feel that as somebody visiting, right? And then when I went in 2015, now when Pope Francis was there, that was 2015, right? Do I have that correct? 2015, the Pope visited again, I believe.
Yes, 15.
All right. So when I went in 2015, what we noticed is there was more communication. So some people had internet access and most people didn't, but it seemed like certain professionals or there were certain allowances that were made for internet access. And I noticed that people felt a little more free just in general, maybe because they were able to get information. And I remember there was a time where people were using thumb drives, right, to pass information along to those who didn't have internet. Now, when I went in 2018, what I noticed was these Wi-Fi parks, right? We were talking about that earlier, where people gather around a particular booth or store or pole or something, and they buy their Wi-Fi and they can sit there and be on their phones. People didn't really have smartphones as a lot in 2018, but they were all able to be on their phones. Now, you said to me earlier, it was internet access that really took this situation and blew it up. So tell me about that.
I like to say always that the internet, the world of the internet, is the only area that the government can't fully control in Cuba. So Cuba is a totalitarian regime. They control everything, all the economics, all the TV, the radio, the press, the associations, the parties. There's only one party in Cuba. They control everything.
Yeah.
And the internet is like our independent, free space to express, to communicate. When I think of the internet, I think this myth, I think is in the Bible. Samson y Dalila, the Samson, the strong man with the long hair.
Yeah, Samson and Delilah.
Exactly. So the internet is our hair, and when you cut it, Samson stays without lose his strength.
So I guess the concern is that if they can do that, how do you continue to fight for your freedom and continue to get the support from people? Because what I remember most about the times that I was there is one of the things I remember the most is the fear. People don't want to be retaliated against. They don't want their families to suffer. Nobody wants to get arrested, obviously. So how do you bring that out?
When you talk about Cuba, you have to talk about fear. And it sounds like an abstract thing, but it's so real when you're Cuban, when you have Cuban friends. I always say that the power, the biggest power that the government, the regime has against us is the fear.
Yeah. So what I noticed too is the Cuban people. There is so much love for their country, right? So much pride in their culture and love for their country. And I found that there was a sense of pride where it almost seems like some people will put on a face to tourists that everything is fine. Because I thought either is it a pride thing or is it a fear of somebody telling on you thing, or is it both?
I think it's both. I always think of Cuba when you study the Cuban culture. There is a tragicomic, or like a tragic and comedy,
yeah,
that you
a tragic
that you can't avoid that. It's funny and it's sad and it's tragical and it's pathetic. And I think it is in our DNA, is in our soul. We are the kindest people, but we are also we laugh. We are famous because of laughing of our disgraces, of our national tragedies. We are famous because of that.
My people are from Puerto Rico, right? So when we were in Cuba, people would say the phrase que somos dos alas del mismo pájaro, if I have that correct, right?
Un pájaro, las dos alas. Of a bird, the two wings.
The two wings, yeah. So, I understand that sometimes you're in a situation and this is what it is, right? So you can either laugh or cry, I think is what you're trying to say, but it looks like people have been rising up. And I think the question is, because this is now obviously global news, right? So the question is this because people were hungry? Because those are what the headlines are saying, that people don't have enough food and medicine. Or is it because COVID has gotten so out of control? Or is it because people have just gotten tired and hunger is a big motivator? So what do you think a lot of this was about, aside from the fact that it's internet related?
I think is related to all of that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have been accumulating things and things. You know, the Cuban government always victimized, you know, put themselves in the role of the victim. But I think the embargo is real. It affects Cuban people's lives. But you know, I think most of all that we have been under pressure for too many years, and it has exploded the like you know, we can take it no more. Is the hunger, is the light blackouts, is the inefficiency of the Cuban government, is the COVID crisis. It's all of that, but I think most of all is the need of the new generation to express. Most of all.
You've been arrested 4 times, according to what you told me earlier. You're 24 years old. You are talking to me right now in New York, right? Knowing that this is an interview that will be out there. Are you afraid?
I'm not afraid because of many reasons. One is that there is a lot of people, you know, making these denouncing all of that, and I have a privilege, and is that I am visible. You know, I'm an actor.
You're visible.
Many people, exactly. So I'm visible. Many people know me. Many people support me. I have been for a few months an activist. I have been arrested. People have claimed for my freedom, and that is a privilege. You know, I'm more concerned about the unknown protesters, the common protester of the people, young protesters. I'm afraid of them, but not me.
Can you see a point, Danielle, where there is a free election and you are 24 years old and you have your whole life ahead of you? And how long will you fight this fight?
I don't know. I think we are really like orphans in this point, you know, because even if we put down this government, we are orphans. There's no political education. There's no political conscience in people. We have been out of the political dialogue a long time ago. So people in Cuba don't know what a political party is. People in Cuba don't know what a Congress, a parliament is. People in Cuba don't know what doesn't know what free elections are. You know, I think that most of the work we have to do is to educate, to instruct, to bring out and socialize this political and civical conscience.
So you said earlier you consider yourself to the left. So you don't believe in foreign intervention. I would assume that means that you don't want the United States in any way involved in any changes. Is that fair to say?
You know, we have to know our national history, and in Cuba we were intervened by the USA government in the last years of 19th century, and that didn't work well. And I believe in national independence. I believe also that all of the world government can help somehow the Cuban people, but I think this battle we have to win it on our own. Let us win this fight.
Would you say that the government is now blocking all of the humanitarian assistance? Because they say that they're not.
They are, as usual, responding very slowly and with all the bureaucracy they are used to. They don't want to accept there is a crisis. People are dying, and not only because of COVID, but also because of lack of medicines, because of lack of ambulances. The sister of my grandmother died like 2 days ago, and she was in home 24 hours waiting for an ambulance. But if my family, in my father, that was who was taking care of her, if he would go to the street and scream freedom, he in 3 minutes would be there at a police car.
So is that the word? If you go out to the street and you shout libertad, the police are on you in a minute?
In a minute.
Really?
In a minute. Yes, I experienced that.
Yeah.
I experienced that. In 5 minutes. You can I invite all the people that want to check that to do it. In 5 minutes, in less than 5 minutes, you have a police car, a police patrol, a police truck, and I mean, only for 7 people, we had a whole truck to arrest us.
Right.
And at the same time, in other provinces where people dying without an ambulance.
Right.
So there is money. There is money for repression. There's money for repression, but not for medical care.
Interesting. Yeah. 24 hours for an ambulance, you're saying, but 5 minutes for police to respond if you're shouting libertad, freedom in the street. So, before we go, I just want to know, Daniel, what do you want the people of the United States, the people of New York to know, how to help the people of Cuba? What do you want them to know that you think they're not getting enough knowledge about?
I would say everybody can help the way they find to and the way they feel to. And I think now we have to hear to the Cuban people.
Listen to the people and listen to what they have to say.
Listen. If you want to know what we need, listen to us. Ask it. For example, I think it's a very personal opinion that would be very, very good to share in social media the pictures, the videos, what is happening.
Well, I will tell you this: you have a beautiful culture, a beautiful country, and a very, very strong spirit, you personally. And it really has been my pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for giving me your thoughts. I appreciate it very much. All right. And you stay safe and you keep your family safe.
Yes, I will make a sign. This sign has become the new revolution sign, the L of liberty, freedom, libertad in Spanish, freedom. So this because of that, I have been hidden. I have been punched. This is a really, really, really rebel way to express these 2 fingers. So I will say goodbye to you with this sign.
So we want to bring in Chris Vasquez right now, the executive director of a nonprofit called Inspire Cuba, also a Cuban American activist based here in New York City. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Darlene. It's a really pleasure to be here.
So we're watching the events, those of us in New York, around the country, around the world, watching these events unfold in Cuba. And for so many of us, like myself, I've been to Cuba 3 times. I've been as a journalist and engaged a lot with the Cuban people there. And what we're hearing in the headlines, right, is that this is about food shortages and medical shortages and COVID response and blackouts. But a lot of the people that I've spoken to say that this is about freedom. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I completely agree that it's completely about freedom. If you hear what people are shouting in the streets, they're yelling "Patria y vida, Cuba libre, libertad." These are words that mean freedom. They're calls to the end of repression. Cubans want to be able to have the basic human right to determine their own future and their own society and elect the system under which they're governed for themselves.
And we've seen some uprisings right here and there over the years. But Chris, what is it that's different about this one? Somebody from inside Cuba told me that what's different is the access to the internet, right? When I was there in 1998, obviously there was no outside information really allowed in from anywhere. In 2015, certain people, certain professionals were allowed some internet access. In 2018, I saw those Wi-Fi parks, if you will. So what's different about what's happening in 2021 in terms of internet access?
Absolutely. I mean, right now, first of all, the internet is being cut, so that is, weakening our ability to see what's happening in Cuba. But internet access, as you mentioned, is incredibly important. The last, and what's different about this movement, the last major protest like this was in Malaconazo in 1994, I believe it was, around 27 years ago. And even that was restricted to just Havana, and that incited the Barcelo crisis, because what the Cuban government does is every time there's an uprising like this, traditionally, they've just released the pressure valve on the pressure cooker and let all of the people out who wanted to come to the United States. I think what we're seeing now is different, unique, and special in the sense that this is an artist-started movement that has brought in a lot of young people who not only have access to the internet, but are very tech savvy and are using their voices and their platforms to create change in their country. So it's vitally important, and it's a moment in time that we need to grab, I think.
What is the right approach for the United States government? Because from people I spoke to inside of Cuba, they don't want intervention, is the word that they use, but they do want and need support. So what exactly is the right approach here?
I think the United States has a long, messy, and complicated history of intervening in Latin America. Some people might tell you Cuba has never truly been free. It's just moved from one revolution, one dictator, a lot of change of hands throughout the years, obviously before 1959. But the reason that could even happen was because, and this is a separate point I want to make, Cuba had a very active, very robust civil society. That civil society has been eroded through the years due to the system that exists in Cuba today. And what we're seeing now is a rebirth, a re-strengthening of that civil society. And so, broadly speaking, I think that the approach of the United States should be to bolster and enhance Cuban civil society. And you don't do that through repressive policies like the embargo, because we can talk about all the ins and outs, but the spirit of the embargo is to make things so insufferable in that country that it incites an uprising. And I don't think you do that, or that's the way to go about it. I think what you need to do is rebuild Cuban civil society first and foremost. But speaking presently, from the embargo, aside from all of that, I think that the United States should not intervene militarily, but we should do as best as we can to send aid. I'm sure there are complexities with that, but more importantly, we should really be leveraging our stance as the most powerful country in the world right now to not only make a strong case for us to show that we support the Cuban people, but to also rally the international community around us. Speaking
about the current government, so President Díaz-Canel, he had said that this uprising was really U.S. backed by the United States, somehow influenced by the United States. He also just recently said that he takes some responsibility and acknowledges the shortcomings. So what are your thoughts about that? And what are your thoughts about, someone said to me as well, is that this is what they do, the government, going back to Fidel, is blame all of the problems on the U.S. embargo.
Yeah, and that's my biggest criticism of the embargo, is that it's a mouthpiece for the Cuban government. But What we're seeing right now, I don't think there's a single person in Cuba, and very few people who actually know about the situation outside of Cuba that think that the embargo is to blame for what's happening right now, the repression going on in Cuba right now. I think that would be a stretch. So Díaz-Canel and the Cuban government, they're going to do what they always do. What they try to do is they try to paint a very nice image for the international community, rally international support to their cause. That's why they don't have any hospital beds, yet they can afford to export doctors all over the world. And really, there's not enough doctors in Cuba for the Cuban people per capita. So it's really what they always do. And if they've acknowledged shortcomings, if they're now letting in aid, it's only to placate the situation because they realize that they are in trouble. Díaz-Canel has previously said, I think it was on Sunday, that he encouraged citizens who believed in the revolution to beat other citizens who were fighting for their freedom. So I think it's very oppressive. I don't think that he has the same, call it historic authority that Fidel had. And I think this moment is different.
So do you think there will be a time in your lifetime, in our lifetime, that we will see freedom, democracy, a different kind of government in Cuba?
I have to say yes. I think it's inevitable, and I hope so. My grandparents fled in the very early 60s in the aftermath of the Castro Revolution. My abuelo, he suffered a lot under them. He had, friends, close family that served arbitrary prison sentence when he came to this country. Eventually he first went to Arkansas, then moved down to Hialeah, drove trucks for Winn-Dixie for almost 40 years to provide for his family. And it's something that he always dreamed of. Unfortunately, he passed and never got to see that day. And I hope that, and I know that we will see that day. It's just a matter of when. They can't hold the people down forever.
All right. Well, Chris Vasquez from Inspire Cuba, we really appreciate you talking to us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Darlene. Really appreciate it.
We thank you for listening, and we thank our production team, Melissa Mack, Darren Price, and Ben Berkowitz. I'm your host, Darlene Rodriguez. We'll see you next time on The Debrief.